Welcome to the Good Oil Podcast. Today, we're diving into a simple but important question. Are we really getting enough omega-3? Many people believe eating fish occasionally is enough, but science suggests otherwise. Joining me are two fantastic guests from GOED, Kaitlin Roke, expert in DHA science and scientific communication, and Elana Natker, a dietitian and consumer insight specialist helping translate science into real-world behaviour. Welcome, Kaitlin and Elana.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Excellent. Well, Kaitlin, let's start with the science first. Most people assume that they get enough omega-3 just by eating fish occasionally. What does the science tell us actually, in terms of what we should be doing in terms of omega-3 consumption?
Yeah, when we think about omega-3 consumption, and people say, "Oh yeah, I eat fish. I must be consuming some omegas." It's really important to consider what type of fish, and Alana's going to go into detail later on what fish to think about. But from the science side of things, there's some data to suggest that actually people aren't consuming as much as they think, or not consuming very much at all. So if we think about recommendations, and there's a lot across different countries, let's say if there's a range between 250 and 500 milligrams of EPA and DHA a day. So if that's kind of what people might be aiming towards, the data shows us that in North America, as an example, people are consuming about 100 milligrams a day. So that's evidence that we're falling short on EPA and DHA intake from a dietary perspective.
And the growing research is showing that intake levels are below optimal globally, and we've seen the heat map that shows that. What are the key health implications of this gap?
Yeah, what I think is interesting is in another study, which you're alluding to, is that they published data looking at a map of intake over the world. And what's interesting is that you can use blood omega-3 levels as a proxy for food intake. And so people don't always remember what they ate yesterday or even a week ago. So taking a blood sample of omega-3s, that can be correlated to an estimate of intake. And it shows that across the world, people are consuming low amounts, other than countries like Japan or other countries that have a traditionally higher fish intake, or countries that might be closer to the ocean. And for the second part of your question, you said, what are the health implications of not consuming enough? So that's an interesting one, because you might not know that you don't have enough. So you don't get a little purple polka dot on your hand that says, hey, watch out, you're not having enough. You might not notice it on a day-to-day basis. And that's because there are benefits to consuming more. There aren't necessarily a health detriment that's visible or obvious if you're not getting enough. But the health benefits are so vast. They range from heart health, brain health, eye health, pregnancy and prenatal health. All of these areas of health can benefit by getting more. So there's reduced improvements in heart health, like reduced risk of cardiovascular disease. Brain health, there's improvements in memory, reduced cognitive decline. So there's so many benefits to more, but you don't necessarily know if you don't get enough.
Yeah. And is it just about eating fish, or is it the type of fish that really matters when it comes to EPA and DHA levels?
Yeah, you definitely want to make sure that you're having fish that is omega. Well, they're fatty fish or oily fish, because the omega-3s, they're fatty acids, and they're found in the fat stores of the fish. And so if you're eating the fatty fish, then that's going to give you more of the omega-3s. So I know in America, at least, people say that they eat fish regularly, and it could be that they're eating shrimp, or they're eating tilapia, or they're eating something that is legitimately fish or seafood, but they're not omega-3 rich. We have to make sure that they're eating the fatty fish that's going to give them all of the EPA and DHA that they need.
And Alana, what about those who are vegetarians or plant-based? What is it they could do to increase their DHA levels?
That's an excellent question. So a big misconception, well, I shouldn't say it's a misconception, but when we talk about omega-3s, there's ALA omega-3s, which are typically found in plant-based sources. So that's your walnuts and chia and flax seeds. And then there's the EPA and DHA, which are marine-based, and those are typically found in seafood, in fatty fish. And so a lot of vegetarians say, I'm fine. I get my omega-3s. I eat so much chia. I eat flax on everything. But that's not giving them the EPA and the DHA that they need. It's the science shows that it's the EPA and the DHA that are really important for cognitive health, prenatal health, healthy pregnancy, heart health, all of that. So we have to make sure that they're getting the EPA and DHA that they need, and they can't depend on the plant-based ALA. What they can do, though, is algal oil is a supplement. You can get marine microalgae that grows in the ocean, and that is actually what the fish feed on themselves to build up their omega-3 stores. So if vegetarians and vegans could take this purely vegan source in algal oil supplements.
Yeah, and obviously there's a lot of debate around ALA, and you mentioned ALA and EPA DHA. Could you maybe explain the differences and why is that conversion limited?
They're actually different shapes. So from a chemistry perspective, ALA is a different shape than EPA, which is a different shape than DHA. And from a diet perspective, we actually need to consume ALA in our diet. It's important, it's essential. We have to consume that fat in different food forms in our diet. Uniquely, humans can actually take ALA and our metabolism converts it into EPA and DHA. But there's science to say that level is low. So what low means is a little bit debatable, but what we know is that our body does not produce a lot of EPA and DHA itself. So consuming EPA and DHA directly is so important because, as we said, there are so many health benefits to consuming more EPA and DHA that consuming it directly, whether it's from fish, seafood, or from a supplement source, lots of different ways to get it, but really focusing on EPA and DHA intake is so important because of that.
And if I can just quickly add, because Kaitlin did talk about the EPA and DHA levels typical in the American that we've seen through data in America. The ALA intake levels actually exceed the adequate intake. So people are getting plenty of the ALAs that they need in their diets. But as Kaitlin said, the EPA DHA intake is well below what's even the lower end of what some global recommendations are. So that's why we do need to focus on the EPA and DHA directly.
Okay. Well, I want to move then on to, why fish alone often isn't enough, right? And there's a lot of, talk about that. But from your perspective, Elana, and a dietitian and real world perspective, why isn't eating fish alone not enough for people to get their DHA, EPA levels?
Yeah, so I alluded to this, again, it's not just eating fish, which people are not doing on a regular basis anyway. I mean, some of the coastal areas of the world where fish is more abundant, probably less expensive, they tend to eat more, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're still getting enough. Yeah. And again, for the EPA and the DHA, we have to make sure that it's the fatty fish that they eat, and they're consistent about getting those intakes. So, we typically recommend 2 to 3 servings of fatty fish per week. It would be wonderful if we see people getting 1 to 1.5 servings per week. So it's usually not happening.
And in the study, it shows that many people that do eat, enough fish don't reach the optimal DHA, EPA levels, right? And why is that?
It goes back most likely to the fish that they are eating. But yeah, there was actually a study in Nutrients that showed that people even eating 3 servings of fish per week, still the median intake was still not at that optimal omega-3 index level. It wasn't raising them to the 8%, which is the low end of optimal. So supplementation is almost always necessary, even if you're eating fish. And the thing is, too, is our diets are varied, as they should be. I'm a dietitian. I want to make sure that people are getting all different types of nutrients in their diet. But supplementation can be that kind of through line through whatever it is that you're eating so that you make sure that you're getting exactly what you need on a daily basis.
Yeah. And we often talk about the type of fish being critical. Can you explain the SMASH concept?
Yeah, at GOED, we use SMASH as an acronym, which stands for salmon, mackerel, anchovies, sardines, and herring. And those are the 5 fish that typically have the highest concentration of EPA and DHA per serving. That's not the only fish that provide EPA and DHA, but it's at least something that sticks in people's minds as like, okay, these are ones that I can focus on.
And for the listeners who want to know your perspective in terms of what is the right fish to eat, what would you suggest in terms of for omega-3 sources? And if, this is probably adding to the question, is that if you're someone who's vegetarian, what would you suggest?
So for, I would definitely recommend any of those, as I said, smash fish. Salmon is pretty abundant all across the globe, and it's an excellent source. I think people are accustomed to having salmon in their diets, and it's something that people can eat at breakfast, on a bagel.
Yeah.
They can eat it, at lunch, on a salad or something like that. And of course, a gorgeous salmon dinner is very easy. So it's something that you can easily incorporate. I think herring and mackerel are more region specific, but there's other great fish like mussels, a shellfish you would not think, or oysters are actually good sources. Tuna is a good source. Barramundi in Australia, excellent source. So these there are plenty of other fish.
Yeah.
I would just say tilapia, shrimp, scallops. Those are typically not good. Good for other things. Good for protein, but not for omega-3s.
Yeah. And then for those who are going to eat fish, how often would you suggest they eat these fatty fishes to achieve their optimal intake of the DHA, EPA?
Well, I mean, based on that nutrient study, I would say great to have 3, but to achieve optimal intake, you need a supplement.
Yeah, that's fair enough. So when does supplementation become a practical and a reliable option?
It's a good idea if you have your omega-3 levels tested and see if your diet is able to provide the EPA and DHA levels that you need to create, the ideal level, and then work on a supplementation dosage that fits that need. And then you can test this every 3 to 6 months, because it does take time for the EPA and DHA to build up in your system. So that's what I would recommend.
So let me ask you both, but if someone wants to improve their omega-3 status, when we talk about the omega-3 index, what are the top 3 simple steps they should take going forward?
I think, as Elana mentioned, something that people can do are test your omega-3 levels. So where are you at? How are you doing? And as Elana said as well, having some time between testing and retesting, because what the test does is actually look at in our blood for an index of omega-3s. And so it's looking at our red blood cells, which regenerate approximately every 90 days. So if you were to take a test, in January and in February, that's not going to give enough time for your body to incorporate those, omega-3s into your body. So step 1 maybe could be seeing where you're at. Of course, another suggestion would be considering the fatty fish. If any of those smash fish felt familiar to someone listening to this, or for someone interested, great. If you've never tried any of those fish types, something that I like to suggest is maybe try it at a restaurant, because they are going to prepare typically a really nice fish dish for you.
Yeah.
And that might inspire you to try something like that at home. There are lots of dietitians that I know I follow on Instagram too, and they have a Salmon Monday. So every day they put their salmon and their veggies in the oven. You don't have to do much else than that, a little bit of seasoning, and they make that a routine and something they try to do consistently. And the third thing that we are getting to is trying to do something consistently. So that might be increasing your fish intake, like picking a special day of the week, like Mondays, to try a Salmon Monday. It might be when you go out for dinner, take a look at the fish and seafood section and see if something looks interesting to you to try that out. And the other thing, if someone's considering starting a supplementation, it's never too late. You can start to supplement in your 20s and your 40s and your 80s. And we can talk about this as well, but there are so many different ways to increase your omega-3 intake with a supplement. Yeah. And we talk a lot about how to do that, and it's being consistent. So I know from conversation, Elana's a morning person. She puts her omegas beside her coffee. I have breakfast in a different way every day. So for me, putting my omega-3s beside my toothbrush before bedtime is what works for me. Yeah. For some people to put their omegas in the fridge beside their yogurt, and if it's a liquid, they mix it right in. So there's a lot of different ways to create a habit and make it consistent, whether that's diet or supplement.
And I want to quickly just add, when we talk about fish and having it be an obstacle for some people, that they're afraid to cook it at home or they're afraid to make it, I think one of the fallacies that we fall into is thinking that we need to have fresh fish and, and all that. But if looking at in your grocery store, getting frozen fish that's already, semi-prepared, breaded perhaps, those pouches of tuna or pouches of salmon that you can just easily take out and put on top of a salad, that all counts. I mean, that is some easy ways to get some more fish into your diet.
Yeah. And just for those who want to understand the importance of omega-3, are there any sort of specific life stages that you think where omega-3 becomes really important?
Omega-3 is important throughout the lifespan. And the most amazing thing is that the benefits start in utero. So if a mother is consuming omega-3s during her pregnancy, baby is already benefiting from that in utero. One of the examples would be related to early preterm birth and preterm birth. So consuming enough omega-3s during pregnancy, if the mom has enough, then there's a reduced risk of early preterm and preterm birth. And then from the baby's perspective, if we're thinking really early life, baby benefits from eye health, from brain health, from developing the brain. And it's amazing that we're seeing these benefits so little. So then as the child develops and into adolescence, we're starting to see brain health benefits. So, there's emerging research on focus and attention, on memory. So then we start getting into adulthood and older adulthood. Now people are thinking about heart health and continuing to think about brain health. So can we reduce our risk of a heart attack? There's good evidence for that if we have enough omega-3s in our diet. And I think, as a younger adult, people might not think, well, heart health isn't a concern for me. I'm healthy. I'm a runner. I eat a good diet. But building omega-3s throughout your life is so important for all of these health effects. But we sometimes say it's never too late. So if you're just learning about omega-3s and you're a teenager, great. See what you can do to build them into your diet. If you're an older adult and maybe already in, 70 or 80 years old, what does that look like for you? Can you fit omega-3s into your diet? There are opportunities to improve eye, heart, brain. Yeah. It continues throughout the lifespan, which is so amazing that these nutrients play a role our entire life.
Well, and I think it's important to remember that omega-3s are found in every single cell of the body.
Yeah.
They're in these the phospholipid layer of your cells. And so they're concentrated in the brain and the eye. And that's why we talk a lot about brain and eye health, especially in early development. But if you have body cells, if you have a body, you need omega-3s. And so it's something to focus on throughout your life.
And someone that sort of commits to this new regime in their life and taking omega-3s, how long does it take to actually, build up in their body in terms of the omega-3 index once they increase their intake, whether it's actually a fish and supplement going forward?
Mm-hmm. So that it can take, from a measurement perspective, 3 months or 90 days or so to actually measure a difference in our blood, because the EPA and DHA get incorporated into the red blood cells. So that's a way for us to measure how long it might take. If there's, a couple weeks or a couple months where people aren't consuming the fish, or they forgot their algal oil supplements and they've been on the road, again, it's okay. Pick it up when you can again. It doesn't mean the habit has to end or be changed. You can always build it back in. And of course, like everything, it ebbs and flows. We're not always consistent with everything in our diet, but bringing that habit back is
excellent. Well, that was great insights. Before we close, is there anything else that you'd like to add to the listeners that want to, really embrace whether it's supplementation or eating fish? Is there anything else that you'd want to add?
Well, I think one of the things that I like to tell people, especially if they're intimidated by starting a supplement, or, question that I get a lot is like, okay, fine, I'll take a supplement. Which one should I take? And I say, first of all, take a supplement that's going to work for you. If it's a liquid, you can't swallow pills. If you need a smaller pill because the large ones are problematic to you. If you want to chew, there's so many different ways to get your omega-3s, your EPA and DHA, that there's almost no excuse not to.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I love what Elana said. There truly is something for everyone. It's so unique from the supplementation world and from the dietary seafood and fish intake world. And I think the thing that I would say is take a look at how much EPA and DHA you're getting. If you're choosing a supplement, flip it over and look at the amounts. Sometimes some supplement forms don't have as much as others. For example, some of the really delicious gummies that are a multivitamin that include EPA and DHA, there's just not that much room per gummy to put in EPA and DHA. Yeah. But now they have these new concentrated chews that have even more, and they're like a gummy. So yeah, take a look at the amounts, or take a look at some of the resources we have or others that show you how much EPA and DHA you could be expecting to get from these.
And do you think, in terms of the level of DHA and EPA, and obviously there's different forms and they rotate in terms of levels, what's DHA for and what's EPA for in terms of health, relief or benefits?
Sure, yeah. So we like to think of them as two peas in a pod.
Yeah.
They're found together naturally in microalgal oil, sometimes and always in fish they're found together. Yeah. Interestingly, microalgal oil you can grow just in EPA or just DHA. So some people are starting to experiment with maybe I need DHA, or actually maybe I need EPA. But we like to recommend, if you can, trying to get them together, because that's how they're found in fish. From a chemistry and science perspective, they have slightly different roles in the body. So DHA, we kind of think of it as being important for structure. So it's found in our eyes, in our brain, and EPA seems to be metabolized more quickly. So it gets into our body, but then it gets used right away. So we don't find it stored as often. But in terms of what's useful for what, we're still kind of on the edge of the science to know, okay, is for brain health, even though DHA is stored in the brain, actually EPA seems to have a lot of really strong science for mood and depression. So that's interesting. For pregnancy and prenatal health, the big focus is on DHA. So ensuring that pregnant women have enough DHA in the prenatal supplement or in the omega-3 supplement that they're taking.
Yeah, and we always tell people to look for the two numbers together. We don't try to separate out one versus the other. So I think that's just it. Consumers have so much that they need to keep track of. Let's keep the message simple to just add these two together for your EPA and DHA intake.
And just last question, Elana, just in terms of if you're a mother, listening to this, and they want to give DHA to their child, is it more DHA, EPA? What would you recommend, for a mother that wants to provide supplementation for children?
I would still, again, look at the two together, the EPA and the DHA, just because there is a lot more science, I think. If you're going to look at the science from one versus the other, there's probably more in the DHA space, but that doesn't mean that the EPA isn't important. No. So I would still look for them together. And I still think, at GOED, we recommend 500 milligrams as, general everyday intake. Maybe for children, maybe it has to be tighter down. I'm not really sure, because there's not a lot of science, for general everyday health in children. But as a parent, I would certainly, I give my children EPA and DHA supplements.
Excellent. Well, we're going to close this episode. Elana and Kaitlin, thank you so much for the great insights for tonight.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. The takeaway from today is clear. Most people still fall short on EPA and DHA. The science is consistent, the intake gap is real, and it has long-term health implications. Fish can help, but consistency matters. And for many, supplements are a reliable way to bridge the gap. Thanks for joining episode 1 of The Good Oil. In our next episode, we shift from science to behaviour, which includes dosage, habits, and future of omega-3. Stick with us, the story gets even more interesting from here.
You're listening to The Good Oil, where better health lies.